Nothing upsets the system more than an individual who thinks for themselves, whose ideas are dangerous and revolutionary. Spinoza was one of these men, so much so that his own community cast him out into a lonely exile. This was the fate of Baruch Spinoza, a 17th-century philosopher born in Amsterdam, born to a Portuguese Jewish family. He was a radical who dared to look at the world, at God, at the Holy Scripture, in a way no one had before. His questions shook the foundations of religious authority in Europe. Spinoza refused to accept dogma. He wanted to understand it, dissect it, apply reason to sacred texts. This courage made him one of the most controversial figures of the modern age. Spinoza's journey began inside a close-knit Jewish community in Amsterdam, a refuge for those fleeing the Inquisition. Please take a second to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like learning about stories about history that aren't mainstream. Spinoza's approach to the Bible was nothing short of revolutionary. He laid out his method in his scandalous work, the Tractatus Theologico-Politicus. His core principle was simple yet profound. Scripture must be interpreted by Scripture alone. Instead, we must study it as a natural object, a product of human history. This meant learning the original Hebrew language and tracing how the texts were compiled and transmitted over centuries. He pointed out numerous inconsistencies, historical inaccuracies, and contradictions within the text itself. For example, he demonstrated that the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, could not have been written by Moses, as tradition held. The text describes Moses' death and events that happened long after his time, clear evidence of a later author or editor. He argued that the prophets were not metaphysicians with privileged access to the ultimate nature of reality. The Bible's true message was ethical, not factual. This separation of faith from reason was a cornerstone of his thought. He believed that philosophy and theology were 2 distinct realms. Philosophy seeks truth through reason and logic, while the Bible seeks obedience through stories and moral commands. This allowed Spinoza to hold the Bible's moral teachings in high regard, while simultaneously subjecting its historical claims to ruthless, rational scrutiny. It was this dual approach that made his work both deeply respectful and deeply subversive. This essay will delve into Spinoza's biblical criticism, his methods, and explosive conclusions. To truly grasp Spinoza's biblical interpretations, one must first understand his radical conception of God. Spinoza did not believe in a personal God who exists apart from the universe, judging humanity and intervening in its affairs. For him, God was nature, Deus sive natura. God is the single, infinite substance of which everything in the universe is a part. This pantheistic view meant that there are no miracles. A miracle would be a violation of the immutable laws of nature. For Spinoza, these could not be literally true. Spinoza, the Bible's central teaching is simple: to love God, to love one's neighbor. This split between moral core and historical husk underpins Spinoza's push for religious toleration. True religion is the practice of justice and charity. The Bible, properly understood, is not a single exclusive path to salvation. It is a moral guide whose central message can be embraced by anyone. If beliefs lead to a moral life, the specific creed doesn't matter. The Bible, properly understood, is a moral guide for all. The story of Judas Iscariot is one of the most infamous tales of betrayal in human history. The disciple who sold his master Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Judas identified Jesus to the authorities with a kiss, leading directly to his arrest, trial, and crucifixion. His subsequent remorse and suicide are seen as a tragic but fitting end for a man who committed such a heinous crime against God. However, a radical rereading, one that resonates deeply with Spinoza's critical method, challenges this entire narrative. This theory proposes that Judas was not a betrayer at all. In this interpretation, the betrayal was a staged event, a piece of political theater designed for a specific purpose. The theory suggests that Jesus' primary goal was not to die for the sins of humanity, but to expose a massive fraud being perpetrated by the high priests of the temple in Jerusalem. This interpretation transforms Judas from a villain into a tragic hero. The infamous kiss was not a sign of treachery, but a pre-arranged signal. This view radically alters our understanding of the Passion narrative. It is a political thriller, not just a theological drama, and Judas is its most misunderstood protagonist. Turning betrayal into political tragedy, the story becomes a tragedy of political maneuvering, not a fable of sin and redemption. According to this provocative theory, Jesus' mission was fundamentally about social and economic justice. He arrived in Jerusalem to find the temple transformed into a center of financial exploitation. The high priests, led by Caiaphas, were allegedly running a complex system of fraud, manipulating currency exchange rates for the temple tax, overcharging for sacrificial animals, siphoning off donations intended for the poor. Jesus' famous act of overturning the tables of the money changers was not just a fit of anger, it was a direct assault on that corruption. The plan was to get Jesus arrested on a charge that required a formal trial. Judas's crucial role was to betray Jesus in a way that looked legitimate, but the plan went horribly wrong. The tragic result was crucifixion, a Roman punishment for insurrection, not a Jewish blasphemy case. Judas, seeing this, was likely overcome not by guilt, but by despair over their failed mission and Jesus' death. The story becomes a tragedy of political maneuvering, not a fable of sin and redemption. The initial plan to expose fraud had been subverted, costing the movement its leader. The Gospel of Matthew holds a unique place in this reevaluation of the Judas story. Matthew, also known as Levi, was a tax collector before he was called to be one of Jesus' 12 apostles. As a tax collector, Matthew would have been a professional record keeper, intimately familiar with finance, accounting, and the flow of money in Roman-occupied Judea. He would have been uniquely skilled in detecting financial irregularities. This theory posits that Matthew may have been the mastermind behind the plan, or at least its chief architect alongside Jesus. He could have been the one to gather the evidence and formulate the strategy to expose it. Why then does Matthew's own gospel present the traditional story of Judas's betrayal? Here, Spinoza's method of critical reading becomes essential. After the catastrophic failure of the plan and the crucifixion of Jesus, the narrative had to be reshaped. A scapegoat was needed, and the man who handed Jesus over was the obvious choice. His actions were reinterpreted as the ultimate act of betrayal, motivated by simple greed. Matthew, writing his gospel for a growing Christian community, would have had to adopt this new narrative. The intellectual tools used to construct it are directly inherited from Baruch Spinoza. He received an elite education in Hebrew scripture, fluent in Hebrew, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, Latin, giving him direct access to foundational texts in their original languages. At the forefront of new science and philosophy across Europe, a skilled lens grinder, grinding lenses for microscopes and telescopes, connected with leading scientific figures, Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, a masterclass in textual criticism. He did not offer mere opinions, he built arguments meticulously. He approached the Bible like a mathematician solving a geometric proof, or like a lens grinder calculating the curvature of glass. This evidence-based method earned him respect and fear. Leibniz and Bayle recognized his brilliance. Applying Spinoza's lens to Judas reframes the inquiry as valid historical and textual investigation. That reputation gives weight to the critical methods he pioneered. Spinoza's analysis of Scripture went far beyond any single story, forming a comprehensive critique of organized religion as he knew it. One of his central targets was the concept of chosenness. He also launched a powerful attack on the power of the clergy. By claiming to be the sole interpreters of a mysterious and vengeful God, they could demand obedience, accumulate wealth, political power. Spinoza argued passionately for a secular state, one that guarantees freedom of thought, freedom of speech for all its citizens. Ultimately, Spinoza's work was a plea to liberate humanity from the chains of superstition. The path to true blessedness, or happiness, lay in understanding our place in the natural order, in living a life guided by reason, in practicing genuine charity towards our fellow human beings. His philosophy was not an attack on God, but an attempt to redefine God in a way that promotes human freedom and flourishing. His critique made him a lifelong enemy of clerical establishments of all denominations, but his message was one of hope, liberty, and rational faith. Baruch Spinoza was a philosopher who lived a quiet, modest life, grinding lenses to earn his bread, privately revolutionizing Western thought, excommunicated, vilified. His books were banned. Still, his ideas could not be silenced. His legacy is not a grand dogma but a fearless spirit of inquiry. He taught us to question authority, to read critically, to use our own reason as the ultimate guide to truth. He insisted the Bible be studied as history, paving the way for modern biblical scholarship. The Judas as collaborator theory illustrates Spinoza's method. Spinoza's impact goes beyond biblical studies. Today, amid religious conflict and absolute claims, Spinoza's message is more relevant than ever. He stands as a timeless monument to intellectual courage, a man who thought for himself at great cost. His legacy invites us. Look with clear eyes, question what we are told, seek a truth that liberates, not enslaves. Thank you for watching and for supporting my channel. Please subscribe, and as always, stay informed.